The young Navy SEAL recruit stood at the edge of the training field, his boots sinking slightly into the wet sand. The cold wind from the ocean carried the salty smell of the sea, but the recruit hardly noticed. His chest was already burning. From the long run, his arms felt like lead from push-ups, yet he forced himself to stand tall. This was Hell Week, the toughest part of SEAL training, the place where many strong men broke down and quit, but he had promised himself he would not give up. Around him were other recruits, men of different ages and backgrounds. Some were younger than him, some older. Some looked like natural athletes, while others struggled just to keep up. Every single one of them was drenched in sweat and sand, breathing hard, covered in mud. The instructors barked orders without mercy, their voices sharp like knives. Nobody was allowed to show weakness, not even for a second. Among the group, one man stood out. He wasn't the fastest or the strongest, but there was something about him that caught the recruit's attention. This man was older, his face lined with age and experience. His hair was cut short like the rest, but the sharpness in his eyes was different. He carried himself with calmness, as if the pain of training could not touch him. He rarely spoke, never joined in when the others cursed under their breath or laughed nervously to hide their fear. He just trained in silence, moving with steady, deliberate strength. The recruit noticed this silent man on the very first day. At first he thought, maybe the man was shy or just didn't like to talk. But as the days passed, it became clear that his silence was something else. It was not weakness. It was control. The kind of control that came from someone who had seen things others had not. The recruit wondered who he was, what story he carried. The raw sun beat down on their backs as the instructors ordered them into the freezing surf. "Get wet and sandy," they shouted. The recruits ran into the cold waves, their bodies shocked by the icy water. They rolled in the sand, then carried heavy logs together. The recruit's muscles screamed with exhaustion, but when he looked to his left, he saw the silent man. The man was pushing forward, his jaw tight, eyes focused, not a single complaint leaving his lips. When others stumbled, the silent man lifted them back up without a word. When one recruit cried out in pain, he placed a steady hand on his shoulder. No lecture, no shouting, just presence. It was strange, almost as if he gave strength without speaking. The recruit found himself copying the man's pace, following his movements. The silent man became like a quiet shadow of strength, a reminder that complaining wasted energy. Night fell, but the training never stopped. The recruits were ordered to run carrying boats on their heads, the straps dug into their skin, the weight unbearable. Many groaned, a few cursed. The recruit's vision blurred, his legs wanted to give out. But when he turned his head, he saw the silent man again. His lips were pressed into a thin line, his eyes burning with determination. He did not speak, did not shout, but he kept moving, step after step, steady as a machine. For the young recruit, this silent figure became a mystery. Who was he? Why was he here? He looked too old to be a new recruit. His body carried scars, faint marks the recruit sometimes caught sight of when his sleeves rolled up. They didn't look like ordinary scars from accidents. They looked like the kind of scars men carried, from battles. The recruit's curiosity grew, but he said nothing. For now, he only watched. When the instructors gave them a 5-minute break, the recruits collapsed into the sand. Some joked weakly, others lay flat, gasping for breath. The silent man simply sat with his arms resting on his knees, breathing steadily, his face calm, eyes distant, as if he was somewhere else entirely. The recruit wanted to ask him where he had come from, why he had chosen this path, but something in the man's eyes stopped him. It was not anger, not pride, but a heaviness, as if words could not explain his story. The recruit thought about himself, about why he had joined. He wanted to prove he was strong, to serve, to be part of something greater. But the silent man, he felt different. His silence wasn't the silence of someone who had nothing to say. It was the silence of someone who had already said enough in life. Maybe too much. The ocean waves crashed. In the distance, the night air heavy with salt and sweat. The instructors shouted again, ordering them back on their feet. The recruit groaned, his body begging him to stay down. But then he looked again at the silent man standing already, shoulders straight, eyes forward. That sight gave him the strength to rise. If that man could stand without complaint, then so could he, and so the training went on day after day, night after night. The silent man never spoke more than a few words, never told stories, never explained his past, yet his presence filled the recruit with questions. Who was he? What did his scars mean? Why did his silence feel louder than words? The recruit didn't know it yet, but the answer to those questions would shake him in ways he could never imagine. For now, all he knew was that, in the toughest training of his life, in the darkest hours of exhaustion, he had found someone whose silence spoke louder than every shout on the field, and that was enough to keep him moving forward, step after step. The days of training dragged on, each one harder than the last. The sun rose and fell, but for the recruits, time had lost its meaning. Pain was constant. Exhaustion was their only companion. Every hour brought a new test. Every test tried to break their spirit. Many men quit, their bodies and minds pushed beyond what they could bear. But through it all, the silent man remained, steady as stone. The young recruit could not stop noticing him. The man seemed older than most of the trainees. He did not laugh at the instructor's cruel jokes. He did not curse when the sand burned his skin or when icy water made his muscles cramp. He simply endured. His face was calm, his eyes sharp. But there was no joy, no pride, only silence. The recruit found himself growing more curious. Who was this man? Why had he joined at his age? Most SEAL candidates were young, in their 20s, hungry to prove themselves. But this man looked like he had already lived a life full of battles. His body was strong, yes, but it was marked with signs of old wounds. Faint scars ran across his arms, small burns, and lines that told stories no one dared to ask about. One evening, after hours of running drills and lifting boats until their shoulders bled, the recruits collapsed together. Some of them tried to lighten the mood. One cracked a joke, another complained about missing warm food. The air was filled with groans and tired laughter. But the silent man said nothing. He sat apart, staring into the distance, his breathing steady as if he was somewhere else, not on the sandy beach but in another world only he could see. The recruit tried to talk to him once. He sat beside him, wiping sweat from his face, and said, "Rough day, huh?" He expected at least a nod, maybe a smile. But the man only gave the smallest grunt, his eyes never leaving the horizon. The recruit felt a strange chill, not because the man was rude, but because it seemed like his silence came from a place of pain too deep for casual words. At night, when they all slept in the cold, huddled together for warmth, the recruit sometimes woke to see the silent man sitting upright, awake in the darkness. His eyes would be open, unblinking. As if he was guarding something, he never seemed to rest like the others. The recruit wondered if the man was haunted by memories, if sleep brought him something worse than exhaustion. During training exercises, his silence became even more mysterious. When they were ordered to carry logs as teams, some recruits shouted commands, arguing over who should take the front or back. But the silent man never argued. He simply lifted his share and moved. His strength was quiet, but it calmed the others. Without words, he became the anchor of the group. They followed his pace without even realizing it. The instructors noticed too. One of them, a hard-faced veteran, walked past the group one day and smirked. His eyes lingered on the silent man before he muttered, "Some men don't need to talk. They've already said enough with their lives." The recruit heard those words, and they only deepened his curiosity. What kind of life had the man lived? What kind of things could make silence feel heavier than speech? It wasn't just the recruit who noticed. The other trainees whispered among themselves. Some thought the man was a former soldier trying again. Others believed he had been part of secret missions. A few even joked nervously that he wasn't human, because no one could carry pain like that without breaking. But whenever someone tried to question him, he gave no answer, just a cold stare that ended the conversation. The recruit began to respect him, even without knowing his story. He realized the man didn't need words. His actions spoke louder than anything. When a teammate collapsed from exhaustion, the silent man picked him up without complaint. When waves crashed over them during surf torture, he held the line without flinching. When others cried or begged to quit, his face never changed. His presence was like a wall, unshaken, unbroken, and yet, beneath the respect, the recruit felt something else, an uneasiness. It wasn't fear exactly, but it was close. The silence of the man was heavy, like a shadow. It wasn't the quiet of peace, it was the quiet of someone carrying memories that no one else could understand. It made the recruit wonder if he even wanted to know the truth. One night, as the recruit sat in the sand waiting for the next drill, the recruit caught another glimpse of the man's arm. His sleeve had slid up, revealing part of a tattoo. It wasn't clear, just a shape, but the recruit recognized something about it. It was no ordinary design. It looked like a mark with meaning, a mark that belonged to a group, a brotherhood. His pulse quickened, and questions burned in his chest. He wanted to ask, but the man pulled his sleeve back down and stood before he could say a word. The recruit stayed quiet, but his mind was racing. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just another trainee. He was different. His silence was not empty. It was full. Full of secrets, full of truth. The recruit didn't know it yet, but soon that truth would come out. And when it did, it would leave him speechless. The days blended together. Hours of running, crawling, lifting, and swimming until every muscle screamed. The recruit was exhausted beyond anything he had ever known, but his curiosity about the silent man only grew stronger. He had learned to watch him without making it too obvious. The man never joked, never complained, and never broke down like the others. His silence became almost like a shield, protecting him from the suffering that crushed everyone else. One hot afternoon, the recruits were ordered to run with heavy packs across the sand. The sun was merciless. Turning the beach into a furnace, sweat poured down their faces, their boots sinking with every step. The recruit kept pushing himself, his throat dry, his legs shaking. He thought he might collapse, but then up ahead, he saw the silent man. His stride was steady, not fast, not showy, but relentless. The recruit forced himself to match that pace. If the man could keep going, so could he. When the run ended, they were told to drop into the sand and do push-ups until the instructors were satisfied. The recruit's arms shook violently, his chest felt like fire and his vision blurred. He fell flat on his stomach, gasping for air as he struggled to push himself up again. He turned his head and caught a glimpse of the silent man beside him. His sleeves had rolled up slightly from the movement, and for the first time, the recruit saw it clearly. It was a tattoo, dark and sharp against the man's skin. It wasn't a normal design, not the kind of ink young men got for fun. This was different, precise, almost official. The recruit blinked hard, trying to focus. He had seen that symbol before, not in person, but in books, in articles about special forces. It was a mark, tied to missions that were never spoken about openly, the kind of missions only whispered about. His heart raced. He forced himself to look away before the man noticed, but the image burned in his mind. He wondered if he had made a mistake. Maybe his exhaustion was making him imagine things, but deep down, he knew what he had seen was real. That night, when they finally had a few minutes to rest, the recruit couldn't shake the thought of the tattoo. He sat with the others listening to their tired laughter, but his mind was elsewhere. Why would a man with a tattoo like that be here, training again as a recruit? It made no sense unless, he thought. Unless this man wasn't here to learn but to prove something else, or to hide from something no one dared to talk about. The recruit remembered the scarred arms, the haunted eyes, the way the man never joined in with the others. It all fit together now in a way that scared him. This man had lived a life before this, one full of battles no one spoke about. Maybe the tattoo was a memory carved into his skin, a memory he carried every day. During a night drill, the recruits were ordered into the freezing surf. The waves crashed over them, salt stinging their eyes. The water bit into their bones like knives. They locked arms and lay side by side in the dark ocean. The instructors shouted from the shore, testing their will. The recruit's teeth chattered violently, his body shaking. He wanted to cry out, to quit. But when he turned his head, the silent man was there again. The man's sleeve had ridden up once more, the tattoo visible in the moonlight. The symbol seemed to glow in the pale light. Sharp and undeniable, The recruit stared at it, his breath catching in his throat. It was no dream, no mistake. That mark was real, and it carried a meaning he didn't yet understand. But he knew it was something important, something dangerous. He wanted to ask right then, to whisper above the crashing waves, but fear stopped him. Not fear of the man, but fear of what the answer might be. What if it was true? What if this man wasn't just another trainee, but someone who had already walked through the fire of wars that no one knew existed? Later, back on the beach, the recruits stumbled in, exhaustion. The instructors gave them only a few seconds to breathe. The recruit's body trembled, but his eyes kept drifting back to the silent man. He couldn't help it. That tattoo had changed everything. It was no longer just curiosity. It was a mystery burning inside him. The recruit lay awake that night, staring up at the stars. The sounds of the ocean filled the silence. The others snored softly around him, but he couldn't close his eyes. All he could see was the tattoo. All he could feel was the weight of the truth he didn't know. He had always believed that training was about proving yourself, about becoming stronger. But now, watching the silent man, he realized that some men didn't need to prove anything. Some men had already done it, and their silence was the only story they needed to tell. The recruit turned on his side, his mind racing. Tomorrow he would try again. Maybe he would ask. Maybe he would find the courage to speak. But deep down he already knew. The truth was, there written on the man's skin, carried in his silence, the tattoo was not just ink, it was a door to a past too heavy for words, and the recruit wasn't sure if he was ready to open it. The tattoo would not leave the young recruit's mind. He had seen it twice now, once in the heat of training and once in the freezing waves. Each time it felt heavier, as if the ink itself carried a story too big for words. He tried to tell himself not to care, that it wasn't his business, but curiosity burned inside him like fire. It was no longer just wonder. It was a need to know. The silent man continued, his routine unshaken by exhaustion. His presence was like stone, calm and immovable. He trained harder than anyone, yet never asked for praise, never spoke of pain. His silence filled every gap. His eyes looked far away, like they belonged to another place, another time. One evening, after hours of endless running and carrying boats, the recruits were given a small break. They sat in the sand, shivering from the cold water, their muscles twitching from overuse. Some of them laughed weakly, others complained about their aching backs. The recruit wiped his face with his sleeve, his heart racing. He saw the silent man sitting a little apart from the group, his arm resting on his knee, the edge of the tattoo peeking out once again. The recruit swallowed hard. His chance was here. If he didn't ask now, maybe he never would. Gathering his courage, he stood and walked toward him. His boots crunched softly in the sand. His throat felt dry and his palms were sweating even in the cold night. He sat down beside the man, not too close, but close enough that his voice could be heard, over the sound of the waves. For a moment he said nothing, just stared at the ground, then he forced the words out. "That tattoo," he said quietly. "I've seen it before. What does it mean?" The silent man did not look at him. He kept his eyes fixed on the horizon. Where the last light of the sun had disappeared, his jaw tightened and his breathing slowed. For a moment the recruit thought he hadn't heard him, but then the man turned his head slightly. His eyes met the recruit's, and in that moment the recruit felt a weight settle in his chest. There was no anger in the man's eyes, but there was something else, something darker, a shadow that came from memories too heavy to share. The man did not answer. He simply stared at the recruit with a look that seemed to say more than words ever could. After a few seconds, he gave a small shake of his head, slow and firm, and then looked away again. The recruit's heart pounded. He wanted to push, to ask again, but the look had been enough. It wasn't a warning, it wasn't even rejection. It was something deeper. It was pain, raw and silent. The kind of pain that told him that asking again would not bring answers, only wounds. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the sound of the ocean. The recruit shifted uncomfortably. His curiosity was stronger than ever, but he felt guilty now, as if he had touched something sacred, something that wasn't his to touch. He opened his mouth to speak, again, But no words came. Instead, he simply nodded as if he understood even though he didn't. The man stood slowly, his movements deliberate. He brushed the sand from his pants and walked back toward the group without a word. His shoulders were straight, his steps steady. His silence followed him like a shadow. The recruit sat there for a long time. Staring after him, his chest was tight. He felt like he had been given an answer, but not with words. The shake of the head, the weight in the man's eyes, it told him more than any story could. It said, "Some truths are too heavy to speak. Some memories too dark to share." Later, when training resumed, the recruit kept stealing glances at the silent man. But now there was something different. Before he had been curious, eager to know the secret, but now he felt something closer to respect. He realized that silence itself was the story, that man carried battles inside him, battles no one else could see, and the tattoo was just a mark of it. Still, the recruit couldn't stop wondering. He couldn't stop thinking about what kind of life could leave a man so silent. What had he seen? What had he lost? What had carved those scars into his body and that shadow into his eyes? That night, when the recruits lay down in the sand to rest, the recruit found it hard to close his eyes. The image of the tattoo burned in his mind, but now it was joined by the man's look. That stare that had felt like 1,000 unspoken words. The recruit realized something important. He might never hear the story, but he could still learn from it. The man's silence wasn't empty. It was a lesson, a reminder that some truths are too heavy for speech. The recruit rolled onto his side, staring at the waves in the darkness. He felt both restless and calm. Restless from the questions burning inside him, calm from the strange respect that had grown in his heart. He had wanted answers, but what he got instead was something different, something deeper. And yet he knew this wasn't the end. The tattoo was more than just ink. The silence was more than just quiet. One day, whether he asked again or not, the truth would reveal itself, and when it did, he wasn't sure if he would be ready. The days of training grew harder. Each morning began before the sun rose, and each night ended long after darkness had covered the sky. The recruits were pushed beyond their limits, crawling through mud, dragging boats across the sand, swimming until their lungs burned. The young recruit often wondered how much more his body could take, but every time he felt close to breaking, his eyes searched for the silent man, and every time he saw him there, steady, unshaken, his presence alone seemed to give the recruit strength. It happened one afternoon during a brutal endurance test. The recruits were ordered to carry a teammate on their backs and run across the beach. The sand was soft and heavy, sucking at their boots. The weight of another man made the task almost impossible. Men stumbled, fell, shouted in pain. The recruit struggled too, every step making his legs scream. Ahead of him, one of the younger recruits collapsed. His face hit the sand, his body unmoving. The instructors barked at him to get up, but he couldn't. His chest heaved, his arms twitched weakly. It was clear he was about to pass out completely. Before anyone else could react, the silent man moved. He dropped his own load without hesitation and rushed to the fallen trainee. He bent down, scooped the younger man onto his back, and lifted him as if the weight was nothing. The instructors didn't stop him. They watched with sharp eyes but said nothing. The recruit froze for a moment, stunned. The sight was powerful. The silent man, carrying not just one weight but two. His face set, his eyes hard, moving forward with a determination that seemed inhuman. The others around him found their strength again, spurred by the sight, and pushed themselves harder. The silent man didn't say a word. He just carried the fallen recruit all the way across the beach, step after heavy step. As he moved, his sleeve slid up again, exposing more of the tattoo than the recruit had ever seen before. In the harsh sunlight, the lines were sharp and undeniable. The recruit's eyes widened, his breath caught in his throat. There was no mistaking it now. The symbol was not just a mark of pride, it was an insignia, one he had only seen in rare photos belonging to men who had served in the most secret of missions. The recruit's legs kept moving almost by instinct, but his mind was spinning. He remembered the books he had read, the whispered stories, tales, of soldiers who went on missions the world would never know about, men who disappeared from records, who carried out operations in silence and never spoke of them again. The tattoo was proof, a silent badge of a life that could never be told out loud. The instructor's eyes lingered on the man too, for a brief moment. The recruit thought he saw something unusual. Respect, even from men who were usually merciless. It was as if they knew who he was, or at least what that tattoo meant. But just as quickly, their hard expressions returned and they barked more orders. The recruit stumbled across the finish line, gasping for air, his chest aching. He looked at the silent man again. The fallen recruit had been laid gently on the sand, still breathing, saved from collapse. The silent man stood above him, his eyes cold but calm, his arms still bare, the tattoo visible for anyone who dared to look. The young recruit's heart pounded. He could feel the truth now pressing down on him. The man wasn't just another trainee. He wasn't here to prove himself. He was someone who had already proved himself many times over, someone who had lived through battles that would never be spoken about in public. As the group recovered, the recruit sat in the sand staring at the man. He remembered the first time he saw him, quiet and distant. He remembered the night he tried to ask about the tattoo and got only silence in return. Now it all made sense. The silence wasn't emptiness, it was weight. The kind of weight carried only by those who had seen too much. The recruit felt a chill run down his spine. The truth wasn't spoken, but it was clear. The silent man had once belonged to a world beyond anything the recruit could imagine. The tattoo wasn't decoration. It was a story carved into his skin. A story of brothers lost, of battles fought in shadows. A story too painful to tell as the instructors called them back to attention. The recruit stood slowly. His body ached, but his mind felt heavier than his muscles. He looked once more at the silent man, who stood with his usual calm, no pride, no boasting, just steady silence. For the first time, the recruit truly understood. This man wasn't silent because he had nothing to say. He was silent because the truth he carried didn't need words. It lived in his scars, in his eyes, in that tattoo. The recruit's curiosity was still there, but now it was mixed with deep respect. He realized he might never hear the man's story spoken out loud, but he didn't need to. The truth was already written in the way he lived, in the way he carried others when they fell. That night, lying in the cold sand, the recruit couldn't sleep. The sound of the waves filled the silence. His body trembled with exhaustion, but his mind was alive. Replaying the image of the tattoo again and again, he felt small compared to the silent man, small but also inspired. He wanted to be like him, not in tattoos or secrets, but in strength, in silence, in the ability to carry more than just his own weight. And yet, as much as he respected the man, he also felt uneasy. The truth had been revealed, yes, but only enough to raise more questions. Who exactly was he? What missions had he lived through? What ghosts followed him into the night? The recruit knew he wasn't ready for the full answer. Not yet. But he also knew one thing. This silent man was more than a mystery. He was a lesson. The tattoo had already spoken louder than words, but the young recruit's mind refused to rest. Every time he saw the silent man, he saw the ink, the scars, and the weight in his eyes. He knew now that this man was not ordinary. He was not just another trainee trying to survive the endless punishment of SEAL training. He had lived another life before this, and the tattoo was proof of it. The recruit tried not to stare too often, but it was impossible. He had questions burning in his chest, questions he dared not ask again. Yet the silence was unbearable. It was like walking beside a locked door, knowing something important was hidden just beyond it. One night, after another day of relentless training, the recruits were sitting in the sand, shivering in the cold. The instructors had given them only a few minutes of rest before the next round of punishment. The recruit leaned back, his body shaking from exhaustion. His mind was spinning with the image of the tattoo again. He didn't even notice one of the instructors kneeling beside him until he spoke. "You keep staring at him," the instructor muttered quietly. His voice was low, almost a whisper. The recruit looked up in surprise. His first instinct was fear. Had he been caught breaking some unspoken rule? But the instructor's eyes were not angry. They were sharp, observant, but almost softer than usual. The recruit hesitated, then said, "Who is he, sir?" His voice was barely a breath. He didn't even know why he asked, but the question slipped out before he could stop it. The instructor glanced toward the silent man, who was sitting apart from the group as always, his arms resting on his knees, his head slightly lowered. He looked like he was carved from stone, unshaken, untouchable. The instructor's eyes lingered on him for a moment before turning back to the recruit. "You don't need to know everything," the instructor said first. His tone carried warning. But then, after a pause, his voice grew quieter. "That tattoo you saw, it's not just ink, it's a mark, only carried by men who served in places that don't make the news." The recruit's breath caught. His heart began to pound. He had guessed, but hearing it confirmed, even in vague words, was something else entirely. He leaned forward, trying to keep his voice steady. "What do you mean, places that don't make the news?" The instructor gave him a hard look, sharp enough to silence him. Then he sighed, a sound the recruit had never heard from any of them before. "Some men fight wars the world will never know about," he said softly. "Missions that aren't written in books, battles that never reach the papers. They go, they fight, and when they return they carry the weight alone. No glory, no medals anyone sees, only scars and silence." The recruit's mouth went dry. He turned his eyes back to the silent man who was still sitting apart, staring into the darkness. Suddenly everything made sense. The silence, the scars, the haunted look in his eyes. The tattoo wasn't a decoration. It was a reminder. A mark of belonging to something secret, something terrible. "Why is he here then?" the recruit asked before he could stop himself. The instructor's lips tightened. "Maybe he wants to prove he still can. Maybe he's looking for something the rest of us can't give him, or maybe he just doesn't know how to live anywhere else." His voice dropped lower. "Don't ask him, don't dig. If he wanted to talk, he would. Respect his silence." The recruit nodded slowly, though his chest was tight. He felt like he had been given a glimpse into a world far bigger than his own. A world of shadows, of men who carried burdens in silence. He couldn't stop staring at the man, couldn't stop wondering what horrors he had seen, what memories haunted his nights. That evening, when they returned to their bunks, the recruit found it hard to sleep. The others fell into heavy rest almost immediately. But he lay awake, staring into the dark. The instructor's words echoed in his mind, wars the world will never know about. He turned his head and saw the silent man lying in his own cot. Awake as usual, eyes fixed on the ceiling, his face was calm, but his stillness spoke of battles being fought inside him. The recruit felt a mix of emotions, curiosity, respect, and fear. He wanted to know more, but he also knew now that some truths were too heavy to carry. If he pushed, if he demanded answers, maybe he wouldn't just hear a story. Maybe he would be forced to share in a pain that wasn't his. The next morning, the training continued. The recruits carried boats, lifted, logs ran until their bodies shook. Through it all, the silent man was steady. His silence had become something the others leaned on without realizing it. He was proof that they could endure. He was proof that even in silence, strength could be louder than words. The young recruit followed his pace again. But this time, he no longer saw just a mystery. He saw a man carrying memories too heavy to speak, a man who had already given pieces of himself to battles unseen. He realized that silence was not emptiness, it was full of stories, full of ghosts, full of truth. The whispered words of the instructor had changed everything. The recruit would never look at the silent man the same way again, he had thought. Silence was weakness or stubbornness, but now he knew it was honor. It was respect for those who were gone. It was a shield against memories too sharp to relive. And though he wanted to know the full story, he also knew one thing for certain. Whatever the truth was, it was more than he was ready to hear. For now, the silence itself was enough. It spoke louder than words ever could. The recruit could not forget the words the instructor had whispered. To him, they stayed in his mind during every drill, every long run, every sleepless night. He now looked at the silent man differently. Before he had only seen a mystery, but now he saw a man who carried something greater than all of them. He carried memories, scars, and battles that could not be spoken out loud. The days of training pushed them all to the edge. The instructors made sure of it. They dragged logs through. The surf crawled under barbed wire, ran miles with heavy packs until their feet bled. Many recruits gave up, their bodies broken, their spirits crushed. Each time someone rang the bell to quit, the sound echoed like a reminder that not everyone was meant to finish. The recruit sometimes felt that same temptation. He was tired, cold, and in pain almost every second. But whenever he thought about quitting, his eyes found the silent man, and suddenly the thought disappeared. The silent man never once looked weak. His silence was not just absence of words, it was power. He didn't need to shout to motivate others, he didn't need to boast to prove his strength. When others stumbled, he lifted them. When others cried, he gave them a steady glance, and somehow that was enough to keep them going. His silence was stronger than any speech. One night, during a long swim, the recruit thought he could not go on. His arms felt like anchors. His chest burned as if fire had filled his lungs. The ocean waves pulled at him, dragging him under again and again. Panic filled his mind. He was ready to let go, ready to surrender. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw the silent man cutting through the water with steady strokes. His face was calm, his movements sure. He was not fast, but he was unshaken. The sight filled the recruit with strength he didn't know he had. He pushed forward, matching the man's pace, and somehow made it to shore. Later, lying on the sand gasping for air, the recruit realized something. The silent man didn't just carry his own weight. He carried the whole team without ever saying a word. His presence reminded everyone what they were here for, what they were capable of. The recruit began to respect him more deeply with every passing day. The question still burned in his chest, but they no longer felt urgent. He no longer needed the man's story to inspire him. The silence itself was enough. It was a story of its own, but respect also brought uneasiness. The recruit sometimes caught glimpses in the man's eyes when he thought no one was watching. There was something there, something heavy and painful. It wasn't weakness. It was grief. It was loss. The recruit didn't know who or what the man had lost, but it was clear that his silence was built from those memories. He carried them like invisible weights, and yet he never faltered. One evening, after hours of punishing drills, the recruit sat in the cold, waiting for the next order. The silent man was sitting alone again, his head slightly bowed. The recruit wanted to go to him, to sit beside him, to tell him that he respected him, but the words felt small. They felt useless compared to the weight that man carried. He stayed where he was, and instead just watched. It struck him then that real respect didn't always need words. Real respect was shown in action, just like the silent man had taught without ever speaking. Respect meant not forcing someone to relive their pain, not demanding their story when they chose to keep it inside. Respect was simply standing beside them, matching their strength, carrying your own weight so they didn't have to carry yours. 2. From then on, the recruit trained harder, not for himself alone, but because he felt he owed it to the man who carried so much in silence. When his muscles screamed, he thought of the man. When his mind wanted to quit, he thought of the man. He learned that silence could be the loudest form of leadership, that scars could teach without a single word. The instructors continued their cruelty, but the recruit no longer feared them the same way. Their shouting was just noise compared to the heavy silence of the man who had already faced far worse. He began to realize that greatness didn't always show itself in loud commands or bold speeches. Sometimes greatness was simply a man sitting quietly, his silence telling stories that no one else could understand. The other recruits began to notice too. Without realizing it, they followed the man's pace during runs. They steadied themselves by watching him during the cold surf drills. Even those who once mocked his silence now grew quiet when he was near. He didn't ask for respect, but it came to him naturally. The recruit thought about what the instructor had told him. Respect his silence. And now he understood fully. The man didn't need questions. He didn't need someone to demand his past. His silence was his choice, his shield and his honor. To respect him meant to accept that silence, to learn from it, not to break it. That night, as the waves crashed in the distance and the recruits tried to rest on the cold ground, the young recruit closed his eyes and thought of the silent man. He realized that he no longer wanted to know every detail of his past. The mystery didn't matter as much as the lesson he gave. Some truths could never be spoken, but they could still change lives. The recruit drifted to sleep with one clear thought in his mind. He would carry this lesson forever. Greatness was not always in words. Sometimes it was in silence, in scars, in the steady strength of a man who carried memories too heavy to share. And in that silence, he had found respect deeper than any story could give him. The final days of training were the hardest. The recruits were thin from exhaustion, their bodies bruised, their minds pushed to the edge. Many had already quit, their bags packed, their dreams of becoming SEALs ended with the ringing of the bell. Only a few remained, and among them, always steady, always silent, was the man who carried more than his own weight. The young recruit had learned by now not to expect answers. He no longer tried to break the silence. He no longer wondered if the man would one day sit down and tell him everything. Instead, he watched and he listened, not to words but to actions. Every step the man took, every burden he lifted, every glance of steady determination was a story of its own. One morning, before dawn, the instructors ordered the recruits into the freezing surf again. The ocean roared as they locked arms and lay side by side in the water. The cold was unbearable, sharp as knives cutting into their skin. Some recruits groaned, others whispered prayers under their breath. The recruit's teeth chattered violently, and his mind screamed for him to quit. But then he turned his head and saw the silent man beside him, his face calm, his eyes unflinching, his lips pressed tightly but not from fear or pain. It was control, pure control. The recruit steadied himself. He would not quit, not while that man endured in silence. Later, when they dragged themselves out of the surf, the instructors gave them only a few minutes to rest before the next drill. The recruit lay on the sand, shivering, staring up at the dark sky. For a moment he thought about the long journey that had brought him here. He remembered the first day he had seen the silent man sitting apart from the others. He remembered the first glimpse of the tattoo, the unanswered question, the whispered truth from the instructor. Now he understood something deeper. The lesson was not in the story of the man's past. The lesson was in how he lived in the present. That evening, as the sun sank below the horizon, the recruits were ordered to carry logs once again. The weight was crushing, and the sand seemed endless beneath their boots. The recruit's shoulders screamed, his legs buckled. He thought about dropping it, about letting go. But then he saw the silent man carrying the log at the front of the team. His back straight, his eyes forward. No words, no complaints, just strength. The recruit tightened his grip and kept moving. It was in that moment he realized the truth. The silent man's lesson wasn't about glory or secrets. It wasn't about the tattoo or the scars. It was about never giving up, about carrying the weight no matter how heavy it became, about standing tall even when no one else could. As the days passed, the recruit found himself changing. He no longer trained only for himself. He trained for his team, for the men beside him. He trained because he understood now that strength was not only personal, it was shared. The silent man had carried others when they fell, and now the recruit wanted to do the same. He began to lift more, endure more, not because he had to, but because he wanted to honor the example given to him in silence. One night, as they sat in the sand waiting for orders, the recruit glanced at the silent man again. The man was staring out at the ocean, the faint light of the moon catching the lines of his face. His expression was the same as always, calm, steady, unreadable. The recruit felt an urge to speak, to thank him, but when he opened his mouth, he stopped. He realized that no words were needed. Words would be small compared to the weight of what the man carried. Respect was not spoken, it was lived. The recruit looked away, but something inside him had changed. He no longer felt the desperate curiosity that once burned in him. He knew longer needed to know the details of the man's past. He understood now that the silence was the story. The silence was the truth. When the final day of training arrived, the recruits who remained stood together, battered, broken, but still standing. The instructors looked them over with hard eyes, nodding slightly. The recruit glanced at the silent man one last time. He stood tall, his face as calm as ever. He had carried them all through the fire without ever speaking a word. The recruit felt pride swell in his chest, not only for himself but for the lesson he had learned. He realized he would carry that lesson for the rest of his life. Greatness did not always come with loud words or bold stories. Sometimes it was found in silence and scars, in the steady strength of a man who had already given everything. That night, lying in the quiet, the recruit thought back on all he had seen. He remembered the cold ocean, the endless sand, the crushing weight of the logs. But most of all, he remembered the silent man, the tattoo, the scars, the eyes that carried unspoken truths. He realized that the man had taught him the most important lesson of all, that some truths don't need to be told, they need to be lived. And in silence, sometimes the loudest voices can be heard. The recruit closed, his eyes, his body aching but his spirit stronger than ever. He had not only survived training, he had gained something more, a respect that went beyond words, a lesson carved not in ink, but in silence. And as he drifted to sleep, he knew that the silent man's story would stay with him forever, not because it was told, but because it was never told.